The brutal winter winds howled across the Wyoming Territory, carrying with them the desperate sobs of Willa Blackburn as she struggled against the ropes binding her wrists to the saddle horn. It was January 1878, and the 19-year-old had never known such bitter cold or such complete betrayal as she had experienced in the past 48 hours. "Quiet back there," growled Marcus Denton, the man who had purchased her from her stepfather for $200 and a promise to take her far away from Riverton, Wyoming. "We've got another 20 miles before nightfall, and your wailing is giving me a headache." Willa bit her lip to silence her cries, tasting blood as the chapped skin split. Her honey-blonde hair whipped around her face as she glanced back at the snow-covered trail behind them. 3 days ago, she had been helping her mother in their small home on the outskirts of Riverton. Now her mother was dead. Pneumonia had taken her quickly, and her stepfather had sold her to this stranger heading north to the Montana Territory. "Please," Willa tried once more, her voice barely audible over the wind. "Mr. Denton, I'm not property to be bought and sold." "This isn't legal. Shut your mouth, girl," Denton snapped, turning in his saddle to glare at her with cold gray eyes. He was a large man, nearly 40, with a scar running from his left eye to his jaw. "Your stepdaddy signed the papers. As far as anyone's concerned, you're my ward now. And once we reach my claim in Montana, you'll be my wife." The word wife sent a chill through Willa that had nothing to do with the snow. She had seen the way Denton looked at her, like she was a piece of meat. She had watched him count out the money to her stepfather, Silas, who hadn't even met her eyes as he accepted payment for the only daughter of his dead wife. The trail narrowed as they began the ascent into the mountains. Pines heavy with snow loomed on either side, and the path became treacherous with ice. Willa's horse, a docile mare that Denton had purchased in Riverton, carefully placed each hoof, but Willa could feel the animal's exhaustion. They had been riding since dawn with only brief stops. "We'll make camp at Widow's Pass," Denton called over his shoulder. "There's a trapper's cabin there. Should keep us out of this cursed weather." Willa's heart sank. Another night of being tied to a bedpost while Denton snored nearby, his hand always close to the pistol on his belt. She had tried to escape the first night, only to be caught before she'd gone 10 yards. The bruise on her cheek was still tender from his backhand. As they rounded a bend in the trail, Willa's eyes widened. Ahead, partially obscured by falling snow, stood a lone figure on horseback. The rider was stationed directly in the middle of the narrow path, blocking their way forward. "What the hell?" Denton muttered, reining in his horse. He reached for his gun. "You there, move aside." The figure didn't budge. As they drew closer, Willa could make out more details. It was a man on a black stallion, his broad shoulders covered by a heavy sheepskin coat. A wide-brimmed hat was pulled low over his face, but she could see the glint of blue eyes beneath it. A rifle rested casually across his lap. "I believe the lady would prefer to discontinue this journey," the stranger said, his voice deep and steady despite the biting cold. Denton's hand tightened on his pistol. "This ain't your concern, cowboy. The girl's my property, fair and square." "No human being is property," the stranger replied, shifting slightly in his saddle. The movement caused his coat to part, revealing the silver star pinned to his vest. "Owen Ellis, U.S. Marshal, and I'm making it my concern." Willa's breath caught in her throat. A marshal. Here in the middle of nowhere. It seemed too fortunate to be true. Denton spat into the snow. "I've got papers. Her stepdaddy signed her over to me legal-like." Marshal Ellis shook his head slowly. "That's not how the law works in Wyoming Territory or anywhere else in these United States. Now, you're going to untie the lady, and then you and I are going to have a conversation about kidnapping charges." Willa saw Denton's shoulders tense, knew what he was about to do before he did it. "Look out!" she cried as Denton drew his pistol with surprising speed, but the marshal was faster. His rifle came up and barked once, the sound echoing off the mountain walls. Denton's pistol discharged harmlessly into the ground as he clutched his right shoulder, blood already seeping through his fingers. "That was foolish," Marshal Ellis said calmly, keeping his rifle trained on the wounded man. "The next one goes somewhere more permanent. Now drop the gun and dismount. Slowly." Cursing, Denton let his pistol fall into the snow and awkwardly swung his leg over his horse. The moment his boots touched the ground, the marshal was off his stallion and behind him, efficiently binding Denton's hands with a pair of handcuffs. Only then did the marshal approach Willa. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd initially thought, perhaps 30, with a strong jawline partially obscured by a light beard dusted with snow. His blue eyes were kind as he drew a knife and carefully cut the ropes binding her to the saddle. "Are you hurt, miss?" he asked, his deep voice gentle now. "Just cold and tired," Willa replied, rubbing her chafed wrists. "And grateful. How did you find us?" "Your neighbor, Mrs. Hollister, rode into Riverton yesterday evening. Said she saw your stepfather sell you to a stranger. I've been tracking you since dawn." He sheathed his knife and offered her a canteen. "The water's not frozen yet. Small miracle." Willa drank gratefully, the cold water easing her parched throat. "He was taking me to Montana, said I was to be his wife." Something dangerous flashed in the marshal's eyes as he glanced at Denton, who was now sitting in the snow, still clutching his bleeding shoulder and muttering curses. "That's not going to happen," Marshal Ellis assured her. "We need to get you both back to Riverton. You need proper care, and he needs a cell and a doctor in that order." "What about my stepfather?" Willa asked, hating how her voice trembled. "He'll be furious when you bring me back." "Silas Blackburn won't be a problem," the marshal said grimly. "He's already in my jail for selling a human being," among other charges Mrs. Hollister was eager to share. Relief washed over Willa, followed immediately by exhaustion. The events of the past days crashed down on her all at once, and she swayed in her saddle. "Whoa there," Marshal Ellis said, steadying her with a strong hand on her arm. "We'll make camp at that trapper's cabin Denton mentioned. You can rest, and I'll tend to his wound so he doesn't bleed out before he can stand trial." As they made their way to Widow's Pass, the snow began to fall more heavily. The marshal led Denton's horse, keeping the wounded man in sight while staying close to Willa's side. The trapper's cabin appeared through the white curtain of snow, a small, sturdy structure nestled against the mountainside. Inside, the cabin was sparse but sound. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and there were rough-hewn bunks built into another. The marshal quickly built a fire, the warmth gradually seeping into Willa's frozen limbs as he secured Denton to one of the bunks. "I'll need to remove the bullet," he told Denton, who glared at him through pain-glazed eyes. "It'll hurt, but infection will hurt worse." Willa watched as the marshal efficiently tended to Denton's wound, his movements sure despite Denton's curses and threats. When he was finished, he gave Denton a small dose of laudanum from his saddlebags, enough to dull the pain and make him sleep. Only then did Marshal Ellis turn his full attention to Willa. "Are you certain you're not hurt? The truth now." Willa touched the bruise on her cheek. "He hit me when I tried to run, and my wrists are raw from the ropes, but I'm all right, truly." The marshal's jaw tightened as he noticed the bruise for the first time. He reached into his saddlebags and produced a small tin of salve which he handed to her. "For your wrists, and for that," he nodded at her cheek. "Thank you," Willa said softly, accepting the tin. Their fingers brushed, and despite everything, she felt a small flutter in her stomach at the contact. Not just for this, for finding me, for saving me. It's my job, Miss Blackburn, he replied, but there was a warmth in his eyes that suggested it might be more than duty that had driven him to follow her trail through the snow. Willa, she corrected. Please call me Willa. After what you've done, Miss Blackburn seems far too formal. A small smile curved his lips. Willa, then. He moved to the fireplace to add another log. You should get some rest. We have a long ride back to Riverton tomorrow. As Willa settled onto the other bunk, wrapped in a blanket the marshal had given her, she watched him through half-closed eyes. He sat vigilant by the fire, his rifle across his knees, a guardian between her and Denton. For the first time in days, she felt safe enough to truly sleep. The blizzard that had been threatening all day descended upon them during the night, making travel impossible. Willa awoke to the howling wind rattling the cabin's shutters and the smell of coffee brewing. Marshal Ellis was at the small table, studying a map by the light of a lantern. "Good morning," he said when he noticed she was awake. "I'm afraid we're snowbound for at least today. Storm's too dangerous to attempt the pass." Denton was still asleep or unconscious on his bunk, breathing shallowly. The marshal followed her gaze. "Fever's set in. I've done what I can, but he needs a proper doctor." Willa rose and joined the marshal at the table, accepting a cup of coffee with gratitude. "Will he die?" "Not if I can help it," Marshal Ellis replied. "He deserves to stand trial for what he did, not die in a cabin in the mountains." They spent the day in the cabin, with the marshal periodically checking on Denton and administering water and more laudanum when the man awoke in pain. Willa found dried beans and salt pork in the cabin's meager stores and prepared a simple stew. As they ate together, the marshal told her about himself, how he'd come west from Boston after the war, worked as a ranch hand and sheriff before becoming a U.S. Marshal 3 years ago. "What about you?" he asked as evening approached again. "Do you have family besides your stepfather?" "Somewhere you can go once we return to Riverton." Willa stared into her coffee cup. "My mother was all I had. She married Silas 4 years ago after my father died in a mining accident. I've got an aunt in Denver, but we haven't spoken in years." The marshal nodded thoughtfully. "Mrs. Hollister mentioned she might have a place for you. She runs the millinery shop in town, said she could use an assistant." "That's very kind of her," Willa said, surprised and touched by the neighbor's concern. "I used to help my mother with sewing. I'm quite good with a needle." "I've no doubt you're good at many things, Willa," Marshal Ellis said, his eyes holding hers for a moment longer than necessary before he looked away, clearing his throat. "Storm should break by morning. We'll head back then." The next day dawned clear and blindingly bright, the sun reflecting off the pristine snow that had transformed the landscape. Denton was weaker, but stable enough to travel. The marshal fashioned a travois to pull behind his horse, securing Denton to it despite the man's feeble protests. "It's a 2-day journey back to Riverton," the marshal explained as they set out. "We'll take it slow and make camp early. Don't want to push the horses too hard in these conditions." The trail was treacherous with fresh snow, forcing them to proceed cautiously. Willa rode beside the marshal, finding comfort in his solid presence. As they made their way down from the pass, the terrain gradually became less steep, and they were able to make better time. "Were you really tracking us since dawn yesterday?" Willa asked during a brief stop to rest the horses. "That seems dedicated." Marshal Ellis adjusted his hat, a hint of color touching his cheeks that had nothing to do with the cold. "When Mrs. Hollister came to my office, she was beside herself. Said your mother had only been gone a week, and already Silas had sold you to a man with a reputation even the saloon girls avoided. I couldn't wait for a posse or assistance." "You came alone," Willa said softly. "You could have been killed." "I've handled worse than Marcus Denton," he replied, though his gaze lingered on her face with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. "And some things are worth the risk." They made camp that evening in a sheltered grove of pines. Denton's condition had worsened during the day's travel, his fever higher despite the marshal's care. Willa helped as best she could, bringing snow to cool Denton's forehead while Marshal Ellis prepared a simple meal. "He needs a doctor," Willa said as they sat by the fire afterward. "He won't last another day like this," the marshal nodded grimly. "There's a settlement about 10 miles from here, Clearwater. It's not much, but they have a doctor. We'll divert there in the morning." Clearwater proved to be little more than a cluster of buildings surrounding a trading post, but true to the marshal's word. There was a doctor, an elderly man named Ferguson, who took one look at Denton and ushered them into his small infirmary. "Bullet wounds infected, but not mortally if treated properly," Dr. Ferguson announced after examining the unconscious Denton. "He'll need to stay here for at least a week before he can travel again." Marshal Ellis frowned. "He's my prisoner, doctor. I can't leave him unguarded." "I didn't say you had to leave, Marshal," Ferguson replied with a raised eyebrow. "Though I dare say your companion could use some proper rest in a real bed, not a campsite." Willa blushed as both men turned to look at her. "I'm fine, truly. Just concerned about delaying our return to Riverton." "There's a decent boarding house down the street," the doctor continued. "Mrs. Tillman runs it. Tell her I sent you and she'll give you a fair price." The marshal hesitated, looking between Denton and Willa. "I need to send a telegram to Riverton. Let them know we've been delayed." "And I don't like leaving you alone, Willa. Denton might have associates in these parts." "I'll go with you to send the telegram," Willa suggested. "Then we can inquire about the boarding house together." This seemed to satisfy the marshal, and after giving Dr. Ferguson instructions regarding Denton's custody, they made their way to Clearwater's small telegraph office. The operator, a thin man with spectacles, looked up with interest as they entered. "Marshal," he nodded at the badge on Ellis's chest. "What can I do for you?" "Need to send a message to Sheriff Taylor in Riverton," the marshal replied, scribbling a brief note on a piece of paper and sliding it across the counter. The operator read it quickly. "Prisoner in custody, delayed in Clearwater due to medical emergency, returning in approximately 1 week." He nodded. "I'll send it right away. That'll be 50 cents. As the marshal paid, the operator's curious gaze drifted to Willa. "Don't get many young ladies through Clearwater, especially not in winter. You two married." Willa felt heat rise to her face, but before she could respond, Marshal Ellis said smoothly, "Miss Blackburn is under my protection. That's all you need to know." The operator's eyes widened slightly, but he nodded and turned to his telegraph key. Outside, Willa gave the marshal a curious look. "Thank you for that." He was rather forward. "Small towns, everyone knows everyone's business," Ellis replied with a slight smile. "And I'm afraid you and I are the most interesting thing to happen to Clearwater in months. Mrs. Tillman's boarding house was a 2-story white building with green shutters, surprisingly well maintained for such a remote settlement. The proprietress, a stout woman with iron-gray hair pulled into a severe bun, eyed them suspiciously as they entered her parlor. "Dr. Ferguson sent us," Marshal Ellis explained. "We need lodging for a few days while my prisoner recovers from his wounds." "I don't take in criminals," Mrs. Tillman said flatly. "The prisoner is at the doctor's infirmary," the marshal clarified. "It would just be for myself and Miss Blackburn." Mrs. Tillman's gaze sharpened as she looked between them. "And what is Miss Blackburn to you, Marshal? I run a respectable establishment." Willa stepped forward, determined to spare the marshal further awkwardness. "Mrs. Tillman, I was kidnapped from my home in Riverton." Marshal Ellis rescued me and is escorting me back safely. The man who took me was wounded during my rescue and is now under the doctor's care. We simply need separate rooms while we wait for him to be well enough to travel." The older woman's expression softened slightly. "I see. Well, that's different then." She reached behind the counter and produced 2 keys. "Second floor, rooms 4 and 5. They share a washroom between them. $1 per night each, meals included. Breakfast at 7, dinner at 6. No gentlemen callers in the ladies' rooms and vice versa." "That's very fair, Mrs. Tillman. Thank you," the marshal said, reaching for his wallet. "I'll need to wash some clothes while we're here," Willa said hesitantly. "I wasn't exactly packed for a journey when I was taken." Mrs. Tillman looked her over critically. "You're about my niece's size. I'll see if I can find you something suitable to wear while you're here. Laundry day is tomorrow, you can wash your things then." The rooms were small but clean, with iron bedsteads and quilted coverlets. Willa's room had a small window overlooking the main street of Clearwater, and the shared washroom was equipped with a copper tub and plenty of towels. After days on horseback, the prospect of a real bath was almost overwhelming. "I'll check on Denton, then see about getting our horses settled at the livery," Marshal Ellis said once they'd inspected their accommodations. "Will you be all right here alone?" "I'll be fine," Willa assured him. "I think I'll take advantage of that tub before dinner." A smile touched the marshal's lips. "A bath does sound heavenly after the trail. I'll knock when I return." True to her word, Mrs. Tillman provided Willa with a simple blue dress that fit reasonably well, if a bit loose in the waist. After her bath, with her hair clean and combed, Willa felt almost human again. She was brushing her damp hair by the window when a knock came at her door. Marshal Ellis stood in the hallway, his own hair damp from bathing, wearing a clean shirt though the same trail-worn trousers. He'd shaved, revealing a strong jawline that his beard had partially hidden. Willa was struck by how handsome he was, now that the grime of the trail was washed away. "You look refreshed," he said, seeming momentarily at a loss for words. "As do you, Marshal," Willa replied, suddenly shy. "Is everything all right with Mr. Denton?" The doctor's cautiously optimistic. "The fever's broken, at least." He offered his arm. "Shall we go down to dinner? Mrs. Tillman was ringing the bell as I came up." Dinner was a simple but hearty affair: roast beef, potatoes, and fresh bread shared with the boarding house's only other guests, a traveling salesman and an elderly couple visiting their son who worked at the trading post. Mrs. Tillman kept the conversation flowing, and Willa found herself relaxing for the first time in days. After the meal, the marshal invited her to sit with him in the small parlor. A fire crackled in the hearth, and through the window, Willa could see that snow had begun to fall again, soft flakes drifting in the golden light of the street lamps. "I spoke with the sheriff here in Clearwater," Marshal Ellis said, keeping his voice low. "He's agreed to help keep an eye on Denton so I don't have to be at the doctor's office constantly." "That's good," Willa said, genuinely pleased. "You deserve some rest too." The marshal studied her face for a moment. "How are you holding up, truly? You've been through an ordeal most would find devastating, yet you seem remarkably composed." Willa gazed into the fire, considering his question. "I suppose I haven't had time to fully process everything. My mother's death, my stepfather's betrayal, being sold like cattle." She shook her head. "Perhaps it will hit me later. For now, I'm just grateful to be safe." "You're remarkably strong," he observed, admiration evident in his voice. "Not strong," Willa corrected. "Just surviving. It's what women do out here in the territories. We endure." "Your endurance is a form of strength," the marshal insisted. After a moment, he added, "I hope you don't mind my asking, but what will you do when we return to Riverton?" "Will you accept Mrs. Hollister's offer?" "I suppose I will," Willa replied. "I don't have many options, and working in a millinery shop sounds far better than the alternatives available to a woman alone in these parts." "You could leave," he suggested. "Go east, perhaps. Life is easier for women in the cities." Willa smiled sadly. "With what money, Marshal?" "Everything I owned was in that house with Sela's, and I doubt he kept my mother's things intact after selling me off." The Marshal looked troubled. "I hadn't considered that. I apologize." "No need for apologies. You saved my life. That's more than enough." She stood, suddenly feeling the weight of the past days catching up to her. "I think I should retire. Good night, Marshal Ellis." "Owen," he said as she turned to leave. "My name is Owen." Willa paused, looking back at him. "Good night, Owen." "Good night, Willa." The days in Clearwater fell into an unexpected rhythm. Each morning, after breakfast, Owen would check on Denton at the doctor's office, while Willa helped Mrs. Tillman with chores around the boarding house to earn her keep. In the afternoons, they would walk together through the small settlement, sometimes stopping at the general store or the small church that served the community. On their third day in Clearwater, they received a reply to the telegram Owen had sent to Riverton. Sheriff Taylor confirmed that Willa Blackburn remained in custody and informed them that he had located Willa's aunt in Denver, who expressed concern for her niece and offered her a home if she wished it. "Your aunt seems eager to reconnect," Owen said as they walked back from the telegraph office. Denver might offer more opportunities than Riverton. Willa considered this. "I barely remember my Aunt Patricia. She and my mother had a falling out years ago over my father, I believe. I'm surprised she's willing to take me in." "Family has a way of coming together in times of need," Owen replied. "Though I understand your hesitation, it's not an easy decision." They had reached the small bridge that spanned Clearwater Creek, from which the settlement took its name. Despite the winter, the creek still flowed, its edges rimmed with ice but the center moving swiftly. They paused, leaning against the railing. "What about you?" Willa asked after a comfortable silence. "Do you have family?" Owen's expression grew distant. "My parents are both gone. Father died at Gettysburg, mother a few years later from consumption. I have a younger brother in San Francisco. He's a lawyer there. We write occasionally." "I'm sorry about your parents," Willa said softly. "It was a long time ago," Owen replied, though his tone suggested the wound wasn't fully healed. "The Marshal Service became my family in a way, gave me purpose after the war." "It suits you," Willa observed. "You're good at protecting people." A smile touched Owen's lips. "I try to be." His blue eyes met hers, and Willa felt a warmth spread through her that had nothing to do with her heavy coat. "Though I must admit, this assignment has been different." "Different how?" Willa asked, her heart beating faster despite her effort to remain composed. Owen seemed to choose his words carefully. "Usually, when I rescue someone, I don't find myself reluctant to complete the assignment, to return them and move on to the next task." The implication of his words hung in the air between them. Willa found herself leaning slightly closer to him, drawn by something she couldn't name. The moment was broken by the sound of someone calling the Marshal's name. They turned to see Dr. Ferguson hurrying toward them. "Marshal Ellis," the doctor panted as he reached them. "It's Denton. He's awake and asking to speak with you, says it's urgent." Owen's expression immediately shifted to professional concern. "I'll come right away." "Willa, would you prefer to return to the boarding house?" "I'll come with you," she decided. "I'm curious what he could possibly have to say." Denton was propped up in bed when they entered the infirmary, his face pale but his eyes clear. He glared at Willa before focusing on the Marshal. "Figured out who you are," Denton said, his voice raspy. "You're the one who took down the Garrett gang last year." Owen's face remained impassive. What of it means you've got enemies, Marshal, including some friends of mine. Denton coughed, wincing at the pain it caused his wounded shoulder. They were supposed to meet me in Montana. When I don't show, they'll come looking. Is that a threat, Denton? Owen asked calmly. Just a friendly warning. Denton's gaze shifted to Willa, a nasty smile spreading across his face. The girl's worth more than you think. Silas didn't just sell her to me for companionship. Her mother had something valuable, something Silas couldn't find. He figured she might have told the girl where it was. Willa stepped forward, confusion and anger mingling in her chest. What are you talking about? My mother had nothing of value. Denton laughed, the sound turning into another painful cough. That's not what Silas believed. Said your father didn't die poor like everyone thought. Said he hid a fortune in gold somewhere before that mine collapse. Your mama knew where, but she wouldn't tell Silas even after they wed. Willa shook her head in disbelief. That's absurd. If my father had found gold, we wouldn't have lived in near poverty after his death. My mother wouldn't have married Silas out of desperation. Maybe she was waiting, Denton suggested. Or maybe Silas is crazy. Either way, he sold you to me with the understanding that I'd get the information out of you one way or another. My associates were going to help with that task. Owen's hand moved to rest on the butt of his pistol. You're looking at kidnapping charges already, Denton. Adding conspiracy and intended torture won't help your case. Just thought you should know what you're dealing with, Marshal, Denton replied, seeming unperturbed by the threat of additional charges. Willa Blackburn isn't the only one looking for that gold. And when my friends realize I've been detained, they might decide to seek out the girl themselves. Owen's jaw tightened. Dr. Ferguson, how soon can this man travel? The doctor looked startled by the question. Not for at least 3 more days, Marshal. The risk of reopening the wound will leave tomorrow, Owen decided, cutting him off. I'll make arrangements for a wagon. Denton can lie down in the back. That's not advisable, the doctor began, but Owen was already guiding Willa toward the door. Pack your things tonight, he told her quietly as they stepped outside. We need to get back to Riverton as quickly as possible. You believe him? Willa asked once they were well away from the infirmary. About the gold and my father, Owen's expression was grave. I believe he believes it, which is dangerous enough. And I've heard rumors about your father's mine. There was talk at the time that he'd struck a rich vein just before the collapse. Willa stopped walking, stunned. Why didn't anyone tell me this? It was just rumor, Owen said gently. And you were young, what, 14 when he died? What would have been the point in filling your head with tales of lost gold, if it's true? Willa whispered, the implications dawning on her. If my father did find gold and my mother knew about it, then Silas's desperation makes more sense, Owen finished for her. And it means you could be in even more danger than I thought. They walked back to the boarding house in thoughtful silence, after informing Mrs. Tillman of their change in plans. Owen left to arrange for a wagon and supplies for the journey. Willa went to her room to pack her few belongings, her mind whirling with questions. Had her mother really known the location of hidden gold all this time? Had she been planning to retrieve it once Willa was older? Or was this all an elaborate fantasy concocted by her stepfather to justify his cruelty? A knock at her door interrupted her thoughts. She opened it to find Owen, his expression troubled. "May I come in?" he asked. At her nod, he stepped inside, removing his hat. "I've secured a wagon and spoken with the sheriff. He's agreed to provide an escort for the first day of our journey back." "That's good," Willa said, sitting on the edge of her bed. "I'm still trying to make sense of what Denton said about my father." Owen pulled the room's single chair closer to the bed and sat. "I did some asking around while I was out. Your father's mine was called the Morning Star, wasn't it? Willa nodded. Yes, it was a small operation, just him and two partners. According to the barkeep at the saloon, there was quite a stir just before the collapse. Your father had been acting strangely, buying drinks for everyone but keeping to himself otherwise. The rumor was that he'd found something big, but was keeping it quiet until he could secure his claim properly. If that's true, Willa said slowly, why wouldn't my mother have used the gold after his death? We struggled so much. Perhaps she couldn't access it, Owen suggested. Or maybe she was afraid gold can make people do terrible things. Look at what Silas did, just on the possibility that you might know something. Willa wrapped her arms around herself, feeling suddenly cold despite the warmth of the room. What am I going to do, Owen? If people believe I know where this gold is, I'll never be safe. Owen leaned forward, his eyes intense. First, we get back to Riverton, then we find out the truth from Silas. After that, he hesitated, then reached out to take her hand. After that, I'll help you figure it out. You're not alone in this, Willa. The warmth of his hand around her sent a flutter through Willa's stomach. Why are you doing all this? It's far beyond your duty as a marshal. For a moment, Owen seemed at a loss for words. Then, very quietly, he said, because from the moment I saw you on that mountain trail, something changed for me. I can't explain it, but I know I can't simply return you to Riverton and walk away. Willa's breath caught. She had felt it too, this inexplicable connection between them, but had attributed it to gratitude and the intensity of their shared experience. Owen, she whispered, not trusting her voice at full volume. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, he assured her, squeezing her hand gently before releasing it. I shouldn't have spoken so plainly. It's inappropriate given the circumstances. No, Willa said quickly, surprising herself with her boldness. I'm glad you did. I felt it too, this connection. I thought perhaps it was just me, or that I was confusing gratitude with something else. Owen's eyes softened. It's more than gratitude, at least for me. But now isn't the time to explore that, not with the danger we're facing. When then? Willa asked, her heart pounding. A small smile touched Owen's lips. When you're safe, when this is over, when you've had time to consider your options without the pressure of circumstance. He stood, placing his hat back on his head. We leave at first light, try to get some rest. After Owen left, Willa found sleep elusive. Her mind alternated between thoughts of her father's possible discovery, the danger Denton had warned of, and the warmth in Owen's blue eyes when he confessed his feelings. By the time dawn broke, she had reached a decision about at least one thing. Whatever happened with the gold, she wanted Owen Ellis to remain in her life. The journey back to Riverton was more comfortable in the wagon, though slower than traveling by horseback. Denton, secured in the back with his hands cuffed, remained sullen and mostly silent. The sheriff's deputy from Clearwater accompanied them for the first day as promised, turning back when they reached the main road that would eventually lead them to Riverton. On the second night, as they camped beside the road, Owen confided his concern that they were being followed. I've noticed tracks diverging from the main trail, then rejoining it ahead of us, he told Willa as they sat by the fire. Denton was already asleep or pretending to be in the wagon. Could be nothing, but I don't like it. Denton's associates, Willa asked, keeping her voice low. Possibly. Owen added another log to the fire. We should reach Riverton by tomorrow afternoon. Sheriff Taylor will meet us at the edge of town with reinforcements. And then what? Willa couldn't keep the anxiety from her voice. If what Denton said is true, Riverton may not be safe for me either. Owen was silent for a long moment, staring into the flames. I've been thinking about that. Your aunt in Denver might be the best option, at least temporarily. A larger city where you're not known. The prospect of leaving Riverton, of leaving Owen, filled Willa with a complicated mixture of emotions. "Would you escort me there, if that's what you want?" Owen replied, his eyes meeting hers across the fire. "It is," Willa said without hesitation. "I trust you, Owen, more than anyone else right now." Something shifted in Owen's expression, a softening that made Willa's heart beat faster. He moved to sit beside her on the log she'd been using as a bench. "There's something I need to tell you," he said, his voice barely audible above the crackling fire. "Something I learned in Clearwater that I haven't shared yet." Willa tensed. "What is it?" "I sent a telegram to the marshal's office in Cheyenne, asking about your father's mine. They replied before we left." Owen took a deep breath. "There was gold, Willa. A significant amount. Your father had filed a proper claim just days before the collapse, but the paperwork wasn't processed until after his death. The claim legally belongs to your mother's estate, which means it's yours now." Willa stared at him, stunned. "Are you saying I own a gold mine?" "You own the legal right to whatever gold is there, yes, but there's more." Owen took her hand, his expression grave. "The mine was deemed too dangerous to reopen after the collapse. Your father and his partners were the only ones who knew exactly where the gold vein was located. Without that knowledge, it's useless," Willa finished for him, "unless someone knows exactly where to look." "Which is why Silas was so desperate to find out if your mother had told you anything," Owen concluded. "And why Denton and his associates were so interested in you." Willa's mind raced. "But I don't know anything about the location. My mother never mentioned gold to me, not once." "Silas might not believe that," Owen warned, "and others who have heard the rumors might not either." Willa squeezed his hand, suddenly afraid. "What do we do?" Owen's thumb traced gentle circles on the back of her hand. "First, we confront Silas and make it clear that you don't have the information he wants. Then, if you're willing, we travel to Denver. I have contacts there who can help establish the legal ownership of the claim and possibly help determine if the mine can be safely reopened." "And if it can't?" Willa asked. "Then you still own a piece of land that might be valuable for other reasons," Owen replied. "Either way, it's yours to decide what to do with it." Willa nodded slowly, trying to absorb this startling information. "I still can't believe my mother never told me." "Perhaps she was protecting you," Owen suggested gently. "Knowledge like that can be dangerous, as you've discovered." They fell silent, both lost in thought as they watched the dancing flames. After a while, Willa became acutely aware of how close Owen was sitting, of his hand still holding hers, of the warmth radiating from his body in the cold night air. "Owen," she said softly, "when this is all over, what happens between us?" The question seemed to catch him off guard. He looked at her, his blue eyes reflecting the firelight. "That depends on what you want, Willa. I've made my feelings clear, I think, but I won't presume anything." "I don't want to say goodbye in Denver," Willa admitted, "or Riverton, or anywhere else. These past days, despite everything, have been. I've never felt this way about anyone before." Owen's free hand came up to gently touch her cheek. "Nor have I. From the moment I saw you on that mountain trail, something inside me changed. I told myself it was just concern for your safety, but it's more than that." Willa leaned into his touch, her heart pounding. "Then don't leave. Whatever happens with the mine, with Silas, with all of it, stay with me." "Willa," Owen murmured, his voice rough with emotion, "I want nothing more. But I need you to be sure. Your life has been upended in every way possible. You're facing decisions that will determine your entire future. I don't want to be another complication." "You're not a complication," Willa insisted. "You're the one thing that makes sense in all this chaos." Owen's eyes searched hers for a long moment. Then, slowly, he leaned forward and pressed his lips to hers in a gentle kiss that sent warmth flooding through her entire body. When he pulled back, His expression was a mixture of wonder and concern. "I shouldn't have done that," he whispered. "Not while you're under my protection. It's not proper." "Proper is the least of my concerns right now," Willa replied with a small smile, "and I'm quite capable of deciding for myself what I want." Owen returned her smile, but before he could respond, a twig snapped in the darkness beyond their campfire. In an instant, he was on his feet, his hand going to his pistol. "Get behind me," he ordered quietly, all softness gone from his voice. Willa obeyed, her heart racing for an entirely different reason now as Owen drew his weapon and peered into the darkness. "Show yourself," he called out. "U.S. Marshal, I'm armed and I won't hesitate to shoot." For a long, tense moment, there was only silence. Then a voice called back from the shadows. "Easy, Marshal. We're not looking for trouble, just want to talk." "Step into the light where I can see you," Owen demanded, his pistol still raised. "Hands where I can see them." Two figures emerged from the darkness, their hands raised shoulder high. One was a tall, lean man with a shock of gray hair visible beneath his hat. The other was younger, with a dark beard and cold eyes that immediately fixed on Willa. "Evening, Marshal," the older man said, his voice deceptively pleasant. "Name's Harlan Creed. This here's my associate, Tom Rafferty. We understand you're transporting our friend Marcus Denton." "Mr. Denton is my prisoner," Owen replied, his aim unwavering. "And you're interrupting our journey back to Riverton, where he'll stand trial for kidnapping." Creed smiled, the expression not reaching his eyes. "See, that's going to be a problem for us. Marcus and I had some business arrangements that require his presence. Perhaps we could come to some sort of understanding." "The only understanding is that you'll turn around and ride away," Owen said firmly, "or join Denton in my custody." Rafferty's cold eyes never left Willa. "That the Blackburn girl, heard she knows where a fortune in gold is hidden." Willa stepped forward, despite Owen's attempt to keep her behind him. "I don't know anything about any gold. My father died in a mine collapse years ago." "Whatever Silas or Denton told you is a lie." "That's so?" Creed asked, his tone skeptical. "Funny thing about lies, sometimes they're wrapped around a kernel of truth. Like the fact that your daddy filed a gold claim right before he died. That's a matter of public record, missy." "Filing a claim doesn't mean he found anything," Willa countered, trying to keep her voice steady. "And even if he did, the location died with him." "Maybe," Rafferty interjected. "Or maybe your mama told you something before she passed. A bedtime story, perhaps." "A special place your daddy liked to visit." "She didn't," Willa insisted. "And threatening me won't change that fact," Creed sighed theatrically. "Nobody's threatening you, Miss Blackburn. We're simply having a conversation." He glanced at Owen's raised pistol. "Though some parties seem intent on making it hostile." "You have 10 seconds to leave my camp," Owen said, his voice cold. "After that, I start shooting." A tense silence fell over the clearing. Then, from the direction of the wagon, came Denton's voice, weak but clear. "They're bluffing, Harlan. The marshal's too by the book to shoot unarmed men, and the girl's lying. She knows something." Creed's friendly facade dropped instantly. "Well, there you have it. Seems we're at an impasse, Marshal." What happened next unfolded with terrifying speed. Rafferty's hand darted to his coat, and Owen fired without hesitation. The shot caught Rafferty in the shoulder, spinning him around but not taking him down. As Creed reached for his own weapon, Willa acted on instinct, grabbing a burning log from the fire and hurling it at him. The log struck Creed in the chest, sending embers scattering and his shot going wild. Owen tackled him to the ground while Willa scrambled for Rafferty's dropped gun. By the time she had it aimed, Owen had subdued Creed and was binding his hands with a leather strap. "Check on Denton," Owen ordered as he moved to secure Rafferty, who was clutching his wounded shoulder and cursing. "Make sure he hasn't managed to free himself in the commotion." Denton was indeed still secured in the wagon, though he had managed to sit up and was watching the scene with a mixture of pain and fury on his face. "This isn't over," he snarled as Willa approached. "There are others who know about the gold. They'll come for you." "There is no gold," Willa insisted, though she knew now it wasn't entirely true. "And even if there was, I don't know where it is." Denton laughed harshly. "Maybe not. But as long as people think you do, you'll never be safe, not unless you have someone watching your back day and night." His words sent a chill down Willa's spine, not because they were threatening, but because they rang true. As long as the rumor of gold existed, people would come looking for her, believing she held the key to finding it. By dawn, they were back on the road, their wagon now accompanied by 2 horses carrying their unwilling passengers. Creed and Rafferty rode with their hands bound to their saddle horns, much as Willa had been when Owen first found her. The irony wasn't lost on her. "We'll reach Riverton by midday," Owen told her as they set out. "Sheriff Taylor will take custody of all 3 prisoners." "And then?" Willa asked, studying his profile as he guided the wagon horses. Owen glanced at her, his expression softening. "And then we make arrangements for Denver if that's still what you want." "It is," Willa confirmed. "But I'd like to visit my mother's grave before we leave, and I need to collect whatever personal items Silas may have kept." Owen nodded. "Of course, I'll accompany you." They rode in companionable silence for a while, both aware of the prisoners behind them who could overhear any conversation. When they stopped briefly to rest the horses, Owen led Willa a short distance away. "About last night," he began, his voice low. "I want you to know that I meant what I said. What I did. But I also understand if, once all this is settled, you feel differently." Willa touched his arm gently. "I won't feel differently, Owen. If anything, last night only confirmed what I've been feeling since you found me on that mountain trail." Relief and something deeper flickered in Owen's eyes. "Then when we reach Riverton, I'd like to do things properly, court you if you'll allow it." A smile spread across Willa's face. "I'd like that very much." Riverton appeared on the horizon just as Owen had predicted, its collection of wooden buildings a welcome sight after days on the trail. As they approached the town limits, Willa spotted Sheriff Taylor and 2 deputies waiting on horseback, as arranged. "Marshal Ellis," Taylor called as they drew near. "Seems you've collected more prisoners than you set out with." "These 2 were following us," Owen explained, nodding toward Creed and Rafferty. "Associates of Denton's looking to free him. The younger one took a bullet in the shoulder, but he'll live." Sheriff Taylor surveyed the 3 prisoners with satisfaction. "Silas Blackburn will have company in my jail then. Miss Blackburn, it's good to see you safe." "Thank you, Sheriff," Willa replied. "How is my stepfather?" "Surly," Taylor said bluntly. "But contained. He's facing serious charges selling a person ain't legal in Wyoming territory or anywhere else in these United States." As the deputies took custody of the prisoners, Owen helped Willa down from the wagon. "I'll accompany you to your home now, if you're ready." The small house where Willa had lived with her mother and stepfather stood on the outskirts of town, a modest wooden structure that looked somehow smaller than she remembered. Sheriff Taylor had provided a key, seized from Silas upon his arrest. Inside, the house was cold and still, with a fine layer of dust covering the furniture. Willa moved through the rooms slowly, gathering the few items that held sentimental value: her mother's hand mirror, a small wooden box containing her father's pocket watch, a quilt her grandmother had made. In her mother's bedroom, she hesitated before opening the drawer of the small bedside table. Inside was a leather-bound Bible that had belonged to her mother for as long as Willa could remember. She took it out, running her fingers over the worn cover. "My mother read from this every night," Willa told Owen, who had followed her quietly through the house. It was her most treasured possession. As she held the Bible, something slipped from between its pages, a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. Curious, Willa unfolded it to find a hand-drawn map with X marks and notations in her father's distinctive handwriting. "Owen," she whispered, her hands beginning to tremble. "I think this is it, the location of the gold." Owen moved to her side, examining the map over her shoulder. "It looks like a section of the mine. See these markings? They correspond to tunnel locations." Willa stared at the map, a mixture of emotions washing over her. She knew all along. She had the map hidden in her Bible. "Where no one would think to look," Owen said softly, "and where you would eventually find it when the time was right." Tears filled Willa's eyes as she realized the truth. "She was waiting until I was old enough to claim my inheritance properly, to use it wisely, and then she fell ill so suddenly." Owen's arm slipped around her shoulders, offering comfort. "She found a way to pass it to you nonetheless. She must have known you'd come back for her Bible." Willa leaned against him, drawing strength from his solid presence. "What do I do now, if people find out I have the map?" "First, we keep it secret," Owen decided. "We'll take it to Denver, to the federal land office there. They can verify the claim's validity and help secure your legal rights. After that, we can consult mining engineers about whether it's safe to extract the gold." Willa asked, looking up at him. Owen's eyes were warm as they met hers. "If you'll have me by your side, yes." "We." 2 weeks later, Willa stood on the platform of the Denver train station, watching as Owen spoke with a representative from the land office who had come to meet them. The journey from Riverton had been uneventful but transformative. With each passing day, her feelings for the marshal had deepened, and his for her. Her Aunt Patricia had welcomed them with open arms, genuinely overjoyed to reconnect with her niece after so many years. The falling out with Willa's mother, it turned out, had been a misunderstanding that both women had been too proud to resolve before Elizabeth's death. "It's all arranged," Owen said as he rejoined her. "The land office has confirmed your claim, and they've engaged a mining engineer to assess the site next month." Willa nodded, taking in the news calmly. The map had indeed revealed the location of a rich gold vein, one that preliminary estimates suggested could be worth a small fortune. But somehow the gold seemed less important now than it had before. "What will you do now?" she asked Owen. "Return to your duties as a marshal." Owen took her hands in his expression serious. "That depends on you, Willa. I've requested a transfer to the Denver office. They're considering it." Hope bloomed in Willa's chest. "You'd stay in Denver." "I'd stay wherever you are," Owen replied simply. "If you'll have me." Willa felt a smile spreading across her face. "I think I made my feelings clear back in Clearwater, Marshal Ellis." Owen laughed, the sound warming her from the inside out. "You did indeed, Miss Blackburn, but I find myself wanting to hear them again." "I love you," Willa said without hesitation, the words feeling right and true as they left her lips. "I think I've loved you since that moment on the mountain trail when you appeared like an answer to a prayer I hadn't even known I was making." Owen's eyes shone with emotion as he drew her closer. "And I love you, Willa Blackburn, more than I thought possible in such a short time." Around them, the bustle of the Denver train station continued. But in that moment, they might have been alone in the world. As Owen leaned down to kiss her, Willa reflected on the strange journey that had brought her here, from a prisoner on horseback to a woman in love, from destitution to unexpected wealth. "What are you thinking about?" Owen asked as they parted. How sometimes the worst moments in our lives can lead to the best, Willa replied, squeezing his hands. If Silas hadn't sold me to Denton, if you hadn't found me on that mountain trail, if your father hadn't hidden gold in a mine, Owen added with a smile. If your mother hadn't preserved the map. A series of unfortunate and fortunate events, Willa agreed, leading us here. And where do we go from here? Owen asked, offering her his arm as they prepared to leave the station. Willa took his arm, feeling a sense of peace and rightness she hadn't experienced in years. Forward together. The rest is just details. 6 months later, on a clear spring day, Willa stood before the partially reopened Morning Star mine. The mining engineers had determined that a portion of the mine could be safely accessed, and the first extraction of gold had exceeded even the most optimistic predictions. Beside her stood Owen, no longer wearing the marshal's badge. He had resigned his position after the Denver office had delayed his transfer request repeatedly. Instead, he had accepted a position with the mining company that Willa had formed, overseeing security for the operation. Mrs. Ellis, he said, still savoring the sound of her new name after 3 months of marriage. The first shipment is ready to leave for the assay office. Willa smiled up at her husband, her heart full. I still can't quite believe it's real. Which part? Owen asked, slipping an arm around her waist. The gold or the fact that we're here to see it recovered? All of it, Willa admitted. Sometimes I wake up expecting to find myself back in that cabin with Silas or tied to Denton's saddle in the snow. Owen pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her temple. Those days are long gone. Silas will spend years in prison, and Denton even longer. News had reached them the previous week that Denton, Crade, and Rafferty had all received substantial sentences for kidnapping and attempted murder. Willa Blackburn had been convicted as well, though his sentence was lighter due to his cooperation with authorities. I've been thinking, Willa said as they watched workers carefully loading the gold ore into a heavily guarded wagon, about what to do with the proceeds. It's your decision, Owen reminded her. Your inheritance. Our decision, Willa corrected. And I think a portion should go to establishing a school in Riverton, and perhaps a fund for widows and orphans like my mother and I once were. Owen's eyes softened with pride and love. You have a generous heart, Willa Ellis. I have everything I need, she replied simply. More than I ever dreamed possible that day on the mountain trail when a handsome marshal intercepted my kidnapper. As they walked back toward their waiting carriage, Willa reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the desperation of being sold to a stranger, through the terror of captivity and the danger of pursuit, to finding love in the most unexpected circumstances, it had been a road filled with hardship, but leading to joy. The Wyoming mountains rose in the distance, still capped with snow even in spring. Somewhere in those peaks was the trail where Owen had found her, where their story had begun. It seemed fitting that the gold which had indirectly brought them together would now help secure their future and benefit others who faced hardships similar to those Willa had endured. What are you thinking about? Owen asked as he handed her into the carriage. The future, Willa replied with a smile. Our future. As the carriage pulled away from the mine, Willa leaned against her husband's shoulder, content in the knowledge that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. From the tragedy of being sold like property, she had found not only freedom but a love deeper and more precious than any gold hidden in the mountains of Wyoming.